Right now, our NewsNation newsmakers, Mailman, who served as White House attorney for the Trump administration, Johanna Maska, who served as senior aide to President Obama, and journalist and media critic Steve Krakauer. Thank you all for being with us.
Yeah. So, guys, you just heard some of those numbers from that Decision Desk HQ poll about how Americans are feeling about the war in Israel. Your reactions. Who wants to start?
So the fear that I have heard from people who are concerned that the instability in the Middle East is going to pour into the United States happens a lot in discussion with the southern border. So you've had a monumental increase of known terrorists being caught at the southern border. Of course, that doesn't include unknown terrorists and that doesn't include gotaways. So I think when you see more than 2 million people crossing the southern border annually for 2 fiscal years in a row now, I think that fear is reasonable. We can't catch everyone coming in, and we don't know. And so I think that you'll see a lot of attention being put on the southern border because of what we're seeing very far away.
Joanna, I want to bring you in terms of the Democratic response to this here. We see some who are really saying that we should call for a ceasefire, demand a ceasefire even by Israel, though that's not going to happen. You have others who are saying it's time for all progressives as well as more moderate liberals to come together on this and make a unified statement of support for a Jewish state. How does this play out in your mind in terms of the Democratic response?
Yeah, look, the U.S. policy is a two-state solution. It's been a very long time, and we haven't been able to get a two-state solution. There's a lot of fear that we could repeat some of the errors of the post-September 11th era, where we actually, our intervention could have caused more terrorist groups and given more power to those groups, because we turned people against us, because we didn't have aid. So what Democrats are trying to do is balance the needs of the innocent Palestinian people. There are American citizens in Gaza and the Israeli, right to defend themselves. And it's a very tough balance. But I think at the bigger level of what May's talking about, yes, absolutely, we need to secure our border. But we're having a bigger existential debate right now with both Democrats and Republicans on how much we want to, as the United States, be involved in the world's conflicts. And I think we're going to have to see that if we don't get involved overseas, we will have those conflicts show up at home.
Yeah. And Steve, I was reading in this polling, too, that we conducted, voter sympathies really split along party lines here. 60% of Republicans say that their sympathies lie with the Israelis. 37% of, Democrats say that theirs lies with the Palestinians. 37% says their lies with the Israelis, excuse me. Explain that discrepancy to me and what you make of that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things happening there, and I have to say at the forefront, I actually am sort of encouraged, as someone who's a big supporter of Israel, encouraged by the results of that poll. I do think that we are seeing a split along party lines in certain areas when it comes to where the overall sympathies lie, if you have to pick one or the other. But I think the overarching number that you showed earlier shows that most Americans, including a lot of Democrats, support Israel and in their need to go and fight back. And yes, we're going to have policy conversations about how involved should the United States be. But I think what we're finding is that the very more extreme progressive left opinion that we see maybe more prevalent on platforms like X and Twitter and other social media platforms, or what you might hear in the loudest voices on cable news, that is really the minority. I think that the majority of Americans from all political parties support Israel. Now, they can disagree on what we should do about it as the United States, but I think most people support Israel. And I think that the loudest voices that we're seeing are just really just a very small fraction of the Democratic Party, and obviously a very small fraction of the United States.
Steve, let me follow up right here. In terms of those small fractions, there are very loud voices. We've seen that as voiced in protests and riots on college campuses across the country and obviously in cities all around the world. But do you think that we're at a time, a watershed moment, where those who are so quick to cancel people for not being politically correct are going to be canceled themselves?
Potentially. I think we're already seeing that. And I think we have to, I been seeing this conversation really rise up. I think this is probably the big cultural conversation we're going to have over the next few weeks is what even is cancellation in this new environment, and obviously as it relates to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. I do think that there's a distinction that we need to make between people that say get their job offer rescinded, or some CEO who makes a blanket statement and says, if you sign that letter that blames Israel essentially for the Hamas terrorist attack, we don't want to hire you in the future. That's not cancel culture. Now, if people start getting fired because they tweet things that say are supportive of Palestinians over Israel or call Israel the occupier, I think that is actually kind of apples to apples with the kinds of cancellations we saw on the other sides.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.